55 years ago tonight, one of the most trusted men ever on television did something news anchors at that time just did not do. Shared his opinion, weighing in on the ongoing Vietnam War.
It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
Now, those comments made after Cronkite returned from a reporting trip to Vietnam gave voice to American doubters of the war and also marked a moment for journalists to follow Cronkite's lead and begin covering the Vietnam War through a critical lens. It worked then because the American people had faith and trust in Walter Cronkite. But to paraphrase the man himself, that's not the way it is. That's the way it was today. Just 6 in 10 adults in the U.S. say they have trust in national news organizations. That's according to the Pew Research Center. Even fewer, just 56% of 18 to 29-year-olds say they have trust. So what does this mean for the state of news opinion and analysis, and what can journalists do to regain Americans' trust? To discuss that and a few other media stories we've been following, we're pleased to have with us Jaquetta Van Zandt, host of the Politics and Prosecco videocast, and Joanna Weiss, editor of Experience magazine, former political reporter for the Boston Globe, and rock star in more ways than one. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Hi, John.
So, Jaquetta, let's start with you. What would happen if, say, David Muir or Norah O'Donnell were to end their network newscasts with an editorial like what Cronkite did that night?
Well, one, I think the country would split in half, and I think that it would start two conversations. One, there's the cancel culture, and then there's those of us who look to journalists to be objective and honest. So I think you see a split, and specifically for my generation, which are millennials, we don't get all of our information off social media. We turn to CNN, we turn to HLN and MSNBC, and some of us even turn to Fox, not me, but I think that this would start two conversations. They'd be canceled in a minute about, they're spreading lies. That's not what we believe. It's not what the government has told us. We don't believe the government. So there's so many conversations that could be had.
I mean, back then, Joanna, Lyndon Johnson, president at the time, was said to have remarked after he heard about Cronkite's statement that if I've lost Cronkite, I've lost the country. Somehow, I don't know that the occupant of the White House today or in modern times would feel the same way.
No, well, the options for news were much more limited back then. I mean, you had 3 major nightly newscasts that everybody tuned into because television was a very limited medium. How many channels were there? 8, 10, if you counted UHF. There were major newspapers that were that convened all of the news, and there wasn't an internet where you could sort of spread a story. A story that happened in Minneapolis might not even make it to Boston. So you had, a smaller landscape of people who commanded so much more of the national attention. Now we have a landscape that is completely splintered, and because of economics, because of politics, you can dial into exactly the news that matches your political point of view, and you don't have to be aware of any other point of view even.
Now, you mentioned the internet, and of course everybody blames everything on the internet. In this case, I think rightly, because you could have someone come out and say, by the way, it's dark now at nighttime, but it'll be brighter tomorrow after the sun comes up. And you would immediately, as you put it, Jack, be attacked by half the country who are saying that's just a conspiracy theory, or they'd parrot other conspiracy theories they've heard. How do we dig out from under that?
I think you have to rely on your own moral compass, and you have to rely on your own education. I think what is interesting for me in studying Walter Cronkite is humanity was always at the center of his news reports. It was always about how to be relatable. He wasn't interested in being a personality, where I feel a lot of journalists and a lot of anchors tend to want to be celebrities more than give informative information. And so for me, I think it's having that center. Where do we come back to? How are we relatable? How am I making sure that the country is hearing what I'm saying as opposed to just listening to the news?
But, you're suggesting a degree of effort by the consumer, by the viewer. And, we've talked about this before, Joanna. I just don't think many news consumers are willing to put in that kind of effort anymore. They want their itch scratched, and they want it scratched now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there may be more people sampling than we want to give credit for. I mean, I think that partly we kind of buy into a myth that the country is more divided than it necessarily is. And you do have to remember that some of these cable news channels, they only get a sliver of the population. But that's partly because news is dispersed. Some people are getting their news only off of TikTok these days. I mean, you just don't have any medium that's commanding the kind of attention that you used to have. But then you also have these cable channels where you have the news operation, and then you have the personalities, and sometimes they are separate and sometimes they really merge together. And so on a network like Fox, you've got in the evening these personalities who are opinion journalists entirely, if you can even call them journalists, who still are commanding this idea that they're presenting the news to their willing audience.
I got to move on, but real quickly, don't even think about it. Name a journalist who, when you see them, you instinctively trust them.
Oh,
It's hard, isn't it?
it is, yes. Yeah.
Can you name one?
I mean, I've got, you can go back to the old days where I would say, did I trust, Peter Jennings of NBC, or ABC, growing up. It's hard to even name the network newscasters now.
Yeah.
Does Oprah count?
I'm sorry?
So does Oprah count? I trust Oprah always.
Yeah, Oprah counts. Absolutely. All right. The biggest media story of the decade, in my opinion, and maybe even longer than that, is unfolding right now before our eyes, and it's the Dominion voting systems lawsuit against Fox News. $1.7 billion, I believe, they're looking for. And last week, there were a number of emails brought out during legal discovery procedures that seem to, from my perspective and from the perspective of others, pretty much lock up the case that Fox executives and anchors knew that they were perpetuating lies about voting fraud in the 2020 election and about Dominion, that they reviled these claims as ridiculous behind the scenes, but then went on the air and spread them and invited people on to spread them. Fox's Howard Kurtz, who hosts that network's weekly media and review show, came out yesterday and said the following about this mega media story. Let's listen.
Some of you have been asking why I'm not covering the Dominion voting machines lawsuit against Fox involving the unproven claims of election fraud in 2020, and it's absolutely a fair question. I believe I should be covering it. It's a major media story, given my role here at Fox. But the company has decided that as part of the organization being sued, I can't talk about it or write about it, at least for now. I strongly disagree with that decision, but as an employee, I have to abide by it.
Think he'll be back on next Sunday?
No, I do not.
Yeah, really? Go ahead.
I do not. This is major for Fox. It talks about their branding. It goes to their reputation, their credibility. His ability to speak out, freedom of press, freedom of thought, his ability to speak out is against everything that they tell their viewers to watch out for. He will now become an enemy of the state, and that's the scary part.
I mean, we've talked about Fox just a minute ago, that they have these personalities. They have also always had a news side and people who really tried to hold the line and be news reporters. Shepard Smith was a longtime news anchor who really tried, I think, to be as objective as possible within the confines of his job. Chris Wallace, excellent interviewer and political journalist. And I think Howard Kurtz, who came from the Washington Post and then was at CNN, is a real journalist at Fox. One by one they have left. One by one they have decided that they can't take that pressure anymore. And yeah, is Howie Kurtz going to be the next person? It could be.
I'm not so sure. I mean, I do not play a big-time media executive on TV or in real life, so I'm projecting a little bit here, but I fail to see exactly how this helps Fox's standing, perhaps not so much in the courtroom as in the court of public opinion. Their own guy just called them out for suppressing any discussion of a story that the entire country knows about. What am I missing?
Well, here's the question is who's running the show here? Is it the audience or is it the programmers or is it the journalists? And this was the subtext and often the text of all of these things that came out in Discovery is like, yeah, we know this, but our audience wants to hear something different. And we've taken our audience on this ride so far that we might lose them if we don't keep feeding them the things that they expect.
But I would venture to say that their audience is now split also. So there are people who are diehard Fox fans, and then there are people who are like, okay, I'm going to get a little bit of my news from Fox. I'm going to do my own research. Not many, but I think that they're split. And for me, this is a tsunami. This is going to have great effects all the way even to Congress, because a lot of those people in Congress who are perpetuating that lie now have to dial it back. You're going to see a lot of people going on an apology tour, and unfortunately, he is the sacrificial lamb. I just believe that.
Well, you know, the number of people who believe the big lie about the 2020 election, the number of Republicans and or conservatives who say they believe it, is still high. I believe it's still a solid majority, but it has dwindled from the early days of 2021, the end of 2020. At some point, doesn't it become a diminishing return for Fox to try to pretend otherwise? I mean, I'm just not sure what's in it for them.
Didn't this kind of happen during Watergate, though? Like this, I mean, it was deny, 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 and then, okay, well, maybe this part is true, or you know, this person is responsible. And then I forget the lady, the Mouth of the South, you know, she also had a part in that Watergate blowing it up. I think that that's what's going to, Martha Mitchell, I think that's going to happen as well.
Well, once the tapes came out, though, all the Republicans bailed.
But already on Fox, they, for the most part, maybe not Tucker Carlson in his deepest moments, for the most part, if you watch Fox during the day, they acknowledge that Joe Biden was president. Nobody was really perpetuating that lie in a real way. It became a fringe issue. What you didn't get on Fox, though, was very much coverage at all, or acknowledgement of the January 6th insurrection. It was like, let's just pretend this stuff didn't happen. Yeah. It was just a tiny thing. Don't look over there. Let's go on to today's new talking point.
It'll be interesting to see how they wind up coming out of all this, not just legally, but in terms of ratings. One more topic I want to mix in here, and it's sorry for those folks who are just coming out of dinner here. It's a little bit nauseating to even talk about. But Scott Adams, the cartoonist who's behind the Dilbert comic strip and has been a frequent right-wing voice in social media, has had his work dropped by hundreds of newspapers. He's lost his book contract after he posted a video rant in which he described the 26% of black respondents who answered no to a poll question asking, is it okay to be white? Not like any poll question I've ever heard, but there it is. He described that as a hate group and urged white people to, quote, get the hell away from black people. And he added that it is, quoting again, no longer a rational impulse for a white citizen to try to help black citizens, end quote. So on the right, of course, they're calling this canceling. Seems to me it's more like publishers not wanting their brand to be associated with this vile, ignorant bigotry. What do you make of it, Jack?
Scott Adams is a racist, and what he said was offensive. It was not only offensive to me, but it was offensive to white people as well, because there are definitely many of us, black and white, who believe that we are all united in this country. What bothers me about Scott Adams is that he has a platform. And I don't care if they want to call it cancel culture or not. My people are not a hate group. We are a group of people who have built this country and are unapologetic about our pride, just as he should be unapologetic about his. But what he cannot do is oppress my people and put a label on us. That we will not tolerate.
Well, and look, it's self-cancellation, because he is savvy enough at this point to know that if you put something out there on the internet to a broad audience that will see it, there will be consequences. Yes. What he said was extraordinarily extreme and racist.
Yes.
And how do you that's not someone coming and digging something out of your past that could be interpreted one way. He went out there and said it and knew what was going to happen.
What if it turns out that this doesn't hurt him financially, that he gets other jobs as a result of it, his fellow crackpots and racists rally behind him, and he winds up being made whole.
He can have that. Listen, and let him have all the financial. Michael Jackson will still be the greatest dancer that ever walked the stage. Mike Tyson will hit harder than any man has ever punched. Michael Jordan will continue to dunk. So my people are okay. We are fine. Let him live his life, but don't oppress mine.
Well, you know, ask Donald Trump if he wishes that he'd been on Twitter all this time instead of having to go on Truth Social. You know, I mean, yes, he can get an audience that is like-minded people, but if he doesn't have the broad audience that he used to have, he's still lost something.
It'd be good to learn that fomenting racial hatred is not a good business model. I hope that's the case. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Well, shout out to the publishers, though, who took a stand and said, we will not tolerate this. So.
Jaquetta Van Zandt, Joanna Weiss, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you both.